Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the sixth appointment of the School of Civil Happiness. My name is Paolo Santori and I'm a researcher in philosophy and economics and a member of the Economy of Francesco. Our guest speaker today is Nancy Folbre, Professor Emerita of Economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her research, and I quote from her personal web page, explores the interface between political economy and feminist theory, with a particular emphasis on the value of unpaid care work. Today, we invited her to talk about the method, the hidden risks, but also the importance of evaluating the work of care. Let me say that we are very, very happy and grateful that she accepted so promptly to spend an hour with us. The three discussants who will interact with Nancy Folbre are Dion Maya Safitri. She has got a master in public policies at the London School of Economics, and she's a Chevening Indonesian alumna. Cristina Pereira Vieseli, a PhD candidate in economics at Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, and Tracy Folbre, PhD candidate in public and urban policies at the New School of New York. Briefly, the structure of the meeting. After my hopefully brief introduction, Professor Folbre will give her talk for 25-30 minutes. Then we will have 3 questions by our discussants. And then if there is time left, we will pick up some questions from the YouTube chat. So feel free and very warmly invited to write there any comments or questions that is inspired, that emerged from our moment together. I say just 2 things before letting the stage to Nancy Folbre. Firstly, this is an initiative organized by 3 villages of the Economy of Francesco: Women for Economy, Policies and Happiness, and Work and Care. But what are the villages? And I'm explaining for the audience, because Professor Folbre was already told. We, the 2,000 economists from all over the world at the Economy of Francesco, split it in 12 villages, each named with a couple of terms which it's hard to find in mainstream economic discourse. So work and care, management and gift, agriculture and justice. These villages are kind of working groups, which will bring us to the 2 events of the Economy of Francesco. The first online this November, and the second in presence, hopefully, in Assisi the next November. The Pope invited young economists who want to rethink, rebuild, and revolve the current economic system to make a deal with him in Assisi. He invited us. We answered, and we are working on proposals that are all centered on one common understanding. This is very important. The quality of economic institutions we want has to be judged from the way they treat the least advantaged, from the way they consider the excluded, from the way they approach the unrepresented from the economic world and economic process, environment included. This is our common view, our Weltanschauung, that we want to do more than a general statement. We want to advance concrete proposals, challenging ones, proposals that are at the limit between agreement and disagreement, even within the various souls of the young participants of the Economy of Francesco. The School of Civil Happiness and its guests are thought to help us in this process with their ideas, provocations, suggestions, and so on. But, as I said when I introduced the first webinar of this school, and this is the reason why I asked to introduce this one, my hope and expectation from the school goes beyond that. To really answer to what the Pope explicitly said, I want to listen the voice of young economists. I hope we will be able to organize a second cycle of webinars of the School of Civil Happiness, where the young economists will be the keynote speakers, and the expert and famous economists like Nancy Folbre will be listening to them, become the discussants. So let the young thought on economics and economic life to emerge. Finally, I'm very happy and proud that we are at the 6th appointment of our school. We hosted amazing people like Jeffrey Sachs, Vandana Shiva, Bishop Domenico Sorrentino, Luigino Bruni, Elena Marujo, Dalila De Rosa, and now with Nancy Folbre we continue our path toward Assisi. By the way, the school, remember that the school expresses its best not only in this live stream, but also in the chance of people to watch in a second moment our meetings, which are available on YouTube. In a sense, School of Civil Happiness is a public good, not excludable and not rivalry, but mostly is a common good, not in the economic sense, but in the sense that is a good that can be fully experienced, fully lived, and fully appreciated, entering the broad context of relationships of the people of the economy of Francesco. In my views, it's not by chance that this appointment sees the collaboration of 3 villages, each represented by one discussant. We divided in villages to work hard and go in depth on complicated issues. But now is the time that we slowly gather and try to find a synthesis, the most inclusive one, but still a synthesis to describe and picture the economy of Francesco. Because economy of Francesco in practice already started. Think about the initiatives, the working papers, the concrete entrepreneurial experiences. It is fundamental now that we become able to tell everyone what we are doing and what we want to do for creating and imagining a different economy. And with that, okay, enough. I shut myself up, and with that, I turned over to Professor Nancy Folbre. Professor, thank you very much for being with us. And the floor is yours, completely yours.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. I feel like these are really crazy and difficult times, but one of the opportunities that we have is to create more international dialogue, and I'm always heartened when people express support for making the global economy work better for the disadvantaged. I think that's a really important goal. You know, I don't really have any easy answers or specific policy recommendations. What I have is some ideas about how to talk to economists about care and how to try to build a stronger consensus for greater public investments in the care of people and the development of their capabilities. So I'm going to just go through a PowerPoint presentation here. The title of which is the care sector. I think that's a way of trying to get economists' attention to, you know, have a broader picture of the economy, not just the manufacturing sector or the trade sector or the financial sector, but to see care as really integral to the economy, and to look at how both paid and unpaid care services essentially subsidize economic growth. So one apology, the examples I give are very US centric because I primarily work on the US economy, but I think the same points really apply around the globe, and I'm happy to talk further about issues of international differences and how how we could think of this in a more global way. So first, let me define the care sector, and then explain what's distinctive about it, and then talk a little bit about accounting from an economic standpoint, and in particular about challenging gross domestic product as a measure of our national success. So I define care work in a pretty specific way and somewhat different. I think in the growing literature on care, you see a lot of competing definitions. But as an economist, I define it as work where concern for the well-being of the care recipient is likely to affect the quality of the services provided. So that's very different from a standard neoclassical economic framework where you assume that people don't have any interdependent preferences and that they're entirely self-interested. And in fact, what it suggests is that interdependent preferences are actually really central to the successful performance of care work. So this means that care work is often face-to-face and hands-on first-name basis, although it can vary in the extent to which it has those characteristics. But the really important point I want to make with my definition is that it's really broad. It can apply to paid work, it can apply to unpaid work, it can apply to the market, the non-market, to the family, to the state, to corporations. And so it spans a lot of the divisions, a lot of the categories that we typically use to think about the economy. And, you know, care work is provided primarily by women, but also men play a pretty important role. So it's gender is important, but care and gender don't overlap perfectly. So just to emphasize the economic importance of unpaid care, what we have learned from the American Time Use Survey, and this is consistent with time use surveys from many countries around the world, is that about half of all the work that is performed is unpaid. It takes place outside the market economy that economists usually focus on. And here, work is defined as just anything that in principle somebody else could be paid to do. It's not defined in terms of whether you enjoy it or not. People typically enjoy working part of the time, whether it's paid or unpaid, and they don't enjoy it part of the time, whether it's paid or unpaid. So it's not based on your utility or your preferences, but just a more practical accounting framework. Could you pay somebody else to do it? But the really important feature of unpaid work is that a lot of it is structured around the needs of dependents. Self-care is important. Care for other adults is often important, but care for young children, the sick, the disabled, the elderly, that is really indispensable. And I think that's an activity that economists have kind of looked away from and not really paid enough attention to. So one proxy for the extent of paid care work is to look at industry sectors. And again, these vary slightly from country to country. But in the US statistical system, which is similar, I think, to most statistical census categories around the world, we have a category for health, education, and social services. And these are basically what I would call care industries, paid care industries. And they are predominantly employing women. 37% of all women in the US worked in these industries in 2017, compared to 12% of employed men. But notice that the percentages for both men and women are actually pretty high.
I think you turn off the microphone. We cannot hear you. Yes. Oh, yes.
Did it toggle? Did it just recently toggle off?
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Yeah. Okay. The problem is there's a lot of things on my screen, and in trying to click ahead on the PowerPoint, I must have clicked on something underneath. But we're together now, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, in economics, we often speak of the invisible hand of the market. And in a way, the most important part of my argument is that we also rely on an invisible heart. That is our concern for other people, and particularly people who need assistance. So here are the distinctive features of care provision. It's relational. Consumers, we could speak of them as consumers, but they're not often making individual choices or decisions. They often don't have perfect information. They're often unable to choose for themselves. So they lack sovereignty in that respect. Often they're not paying directly for care services, but paying through the state or through private insurance. And often care work involves working with other people. In fact, not just working with other workers, but working with the quote unquote consumers of care. That is, teaching is a collaboration between the teacher and the student. The student also has to put out effort and commitment for the teacher to be successful. The doctor relies on the patient to follow good healthcare practices, to take medicine, to cooperate, to be mindful of health. And this kind of team production aspect of care provision makes it really difficult to identify what one person adds, what the value added of one particular care worker is. It's also care work is also very labor intensive, somewhat resistant to technological change. It's hard to measure the inputs and the outputs. value added is often unclear. It has big public good or positive externality or spillover effects. When we improve human capabilities, those capabilities then are of value to people as future workers, as future citizens, as future parents. So the benefits are very diffuse. And those benefits also extend to what we might call social capital or the social climate, the level of trust and cooperation. So these characteristics are really important because sometimes it's argued that care work is kind of costly and is often very poorly paid because it's not very productive. I think that's fundamentally mistaken. It's very productive. It's just very hard to capture the value of the products that are created because of its particular characteristics. So just as a sidebar, I think it's interesting to see how businesses in the US use the rhetoric of care as a way of promising quality. And in fact, the phrase "we care" is trademarked. The phrase "we care more" is also trademarked in the US. The phrase "we care about you completely" is trademarked in the US. So it's a signal of quality. It's not always an accurate signal, but it's an effort to show it. So often maternal care is kind of the paradigm for high quality care. So here you see an advertisement for an airline that shows a young woman mothering a first class passenger. Here's another airplane advertisement. It's natural to want to be cared for. Personally, I have never felt particularly very cared for on an airplane, but I think it's interesting that they want me to think that I am being cared for in a parental way, in the same way that these penguins are taking care of their baby. Let our family take care of yours. This just another example. Okay, so the care sector of the economy, how do we think of it? Well, it cross-cuts the market, the family, and the state. It produces and maintains human and social capabilities. And in care accounting, we always want to pay attention to the fact that there's a difference between price and value. Price is what you pay, and value is what you get. In the US, Warren Buffett is fondly considered sort of the king of Wall Street. He's a famously successful and actually somewhat unusually humane investor. And he wasn't talking about care work when he said this, but I think it's really apt. And in a way, what's distinctive about care work, in my view, is that it creates a lot more value than it is able to capture. And that's the sense in which it's subsidizing many other areas of the economy. So just to go into a little bit more detail about the capture problem, some reasons why care is undervalued. Well, historically, patriarchal institutions made it very hard for women to work anywhere, to do anything but provide care work. And that restriction to care work, crowding them into that, put downward pressure on both the wages and the rewards of engaging in care work. Even today, commitments to care, to family care, or to caring for others are costly, and they tend to reduce economic bargaining power. So in fact, there are a lot of people who would like to make greater care commitments, but they literally can't afford to do so without really endangering their own subsistence and welfare and that of their family members. So although it's yielding public benefits, care provision is imposing some private costs, and we want to look at what is driving those costs. Okay, so we have a host of empirical studies that show that the time devoted to unpaid care work lowers lifetime earnings and increases the risk of poverty. And if you're interested, we can talk more about the detailed models and estimates for different types of unpaid care on which research has been done. There have also been audit experiments, and these are field experiments, where a very large number of resumes are sent out to employers, and the resumes have variation in the signals indicating that the job applicant might be a mother or not a mother. And the signals are pretty subtle, like putting on a job resume that you're active in a parent-teacher association would be an example of a signal of motherhood. And what experiments show is that the resumes, these are fictional resumes that are going out to employers, are much less likely to get a positive response if there's a signal that the applicant is a mother. It doesn't tell us whether the employer just doesn't like hiring mothers or whether the employer thinks that mothers will not be as reliable as workers. So we don't really know the underlying cause, but we do see pretty clear evidence of discrimination in paid employment against mothers. And then finally, there's also very strong econometric and statistical analysis that women in care industries and occupations, that is health, education, social welfare, and occupations, especially like childcare worker, elder care worker, they are paid less than others with the same education and experience. So there's a definite wage penalty for being employed in a care job. So this brings me to the kind of macroeconomic part of the picture, which is a point I think probably familiar to many of you already, the critique of gross domestic product as a measure of economic success. And of course, there are many, many things that, many quarrels with gross domestic product, including its failure to account for environmental sustainability. But I want to look at the ways in which the economic analysis of care or the failure to economically analyze care affects gross domestic product. So parents who are caring for their own children instead of paying for childcare are actually lowering GDP because their efforts are not counted in any way. Mothers who breastfeed instead of buying infant formula are lowering GDP, even though there's a lot of evidence that breastfeeding in the first 6 months of a child's life is really important for their health and also for maternal health. And here's an odd anomaly that the system of national accounts imputes the value of owner-occupied housing. That is, if people own their house and they're not paying rent, that might lower GDP if a lot of people were owners rather than renters, because renting involves that flow of money for a service that enters into GDP. So what the national accounts do is they make an imputation and they estimate the amount of rent you would be paying in the house that you own, and they impute that, and they do that really in order to prevent an increase in home ownership from decreasing GDP. So note the incredible paradox that the value of owner-occupied housing is imputed in the national income accounts, but not the value of housework. And here's an even more profound problem, in my view, the definition of investment. Family spending on children is just part of consumption. It's not treated, it's like what you spend on your children is treated the same as what you spend on a sports car or on a golden retriever. It's just a discretionary form of expenditure that's made. But family spending on children is really an investment in the younger generation, and it's one that pays off for future citizens of the global economy. Likewise, if you look at the way health and education are treated in the national income accounts, they're valued only at the cost of providing it, not by the value of what is provided. So we look at what we spend on healthcare, what we spend on education, but we don't look at what is actually created, the value of the health, the value of the education. And that makes it seem as though these are actually making smaller contributions to the overall capabilities of the economy as a whole than they actually are. And also, by definition, by valuing them only at expenditures, it's just presuming that they don't yield any kind of a surplus, that the value is just equal to the market price. That's kind of the violation of the Warren Buffett principle that value is usually quite different than price. So really the bottom line is that the economy is much bigger than the market, and that our approaches to the economy have been very excessively market centric, and that unpriced or undervalued services of care, which are analogous to unpriced natural assets and ecological services, are really indispensable to the market economy. And the accounting is just wrong. The conventional ways that we rely on to define income, to define wealth, to define investment are sending the wrong signals. So in my view, this is a major threat to our sustainability. Like the physical climate, the social climate is extremely vulnerable to disruption and dysfunction. And I think this disruption is becoming increasingly apparent as it's exacerbated by the global COVID-19 pandemic. I think we can do better, and I look forward to talking with you about how exactly. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. And now I give the word to Dion. She's the first discuss, and she's from our village, Politics and Happiness. So, Dion, go ahead.
Okay, this is a very interesting topic, Professor Nancy. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Dion from Indonesia, and I just graduated this July from the School of Public Policy, the London School of Economics and Political Science, sponsored by the Chevening Scholarship from the British government. So I experienced doing the summer exam during lockdown. Previously, I worked in Indonesia in the National Poverty Reduction Team of the Office of Indonesian Vice President, which handled conditional cash transfer and other social protection issues. And yeah, first of all, I would like to thank Francesco Economy team for having me here. It is such an honor to discuss a very significant topic in economics, which is about the work of care, especially during these extraordinary difficult times. And I think that the work of care has much to do with the village that I represent, namely Policy for Happiness Village, because I believe in your argument that caring for children and the elderly will improve both human capital and social capital, which finally will boost life satisfaction. And in this regard, I would like to discuss a little bit about your article entitled Measuring Care, Gender Empowerment and Care Economy. In this paper, you proposed some possible approaches for the development of indices, because neither Gender-Related Development Index, GDI, nor the Gender Empowerment Measure, GEM, tells us much about the participation in the care economy. And one of the proposed approach to evaluation of non-market work is by using time use surveys, as you explained in your presentation before. But now we all are experiencing second wave COVID and second time lockdown and intensive working from home, which make leisure time, paid work, and care time become blurred. So my first question is, in the aftermath of COVID crisis, how do you think the government should measure better the care of work, especially in developing countries like my country? Because now women, either career women or housewives, are in a more vulnerable position for doing more unpaid work care, such as taking care of their children because schools are closed, taking care of the sick and the elderly. And these unpaid work care activities are excluded from the measurement of national income. And my second question is that how to organize the economy of care, or to make policies which can be resilient to a sudden shock in the future, such as this pandemic, and also to make ethical policies which can protect women's bargaining power. I think that's all from me, and thank you for this opportunity.
So, Professor, if you want to answer, and then answer each.
Oh, okay. You want me to answer sequentially?
Yeah, sequentially, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Those are really good points. I work a lot with time use data, and I have a lot of criticisms of the methodology that is currently being used in surveys. And that methodology is evolving, I think, in positive ways. And COVID-19 is really, I think, going to speed up the process of improving time use survey methodology. And it's going to, I think it will do so in two ways. First of all, there has to be more attention to supervisory responsibility. Time use surveys have been very focused on activities, what you were doing, but sometimes you're not really doing childcare. You just have to be home because your children are there. And that constraint or that responsibility is something that has to be measured, in my view, has to be measured separately. And also there needs to be more of an attention to small interruptions, to kind of an event history approach, rather than just what were you doing in the last 30 minutes, but also kind of looking at the temporal pattern, because maybe you're only spending 2 hours a day in childcare, but if that 2 hours a day is coming at 20-minute intervals of 5 minutes each, it makes it very difficult to accomplish another form of work. And really what all this leads to, I think, is the need for more collaboration with academic researchers and more qualitative as well as quantitative research on time use. So I think we need anthropologists and sociologists and economists and public health experts to collaborate around the development of better instruments. The second question you asked about how to organize care, that's harder to answer in a concise way. I guess I would just say that I think there are two elements to what we need to do. One is we need more public support, more of a public safety net, but we also need to move towards more gender equality and shared care. That means, I think, that we need to be very attentive to the empowerment of women and to making sure that women's specialization in care provision is reduced to at least to some extent. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Folbre. It is a great pleasure to be with you here discussing this subject that is very important. My name is Cristina. I'm a PhD candidate in economics from Brazil. I'm living in Porto Alegre, and I studied the subject in my thesis. I'm a trade union. I work in a trade union advisory institution. The name is GESE from Brazil, and I am in the Village Women for Economy. So in one of your articles about this subject, you say that the women's specialization in care is costly because it reduces both individual and collective power. In the history of industrial system, women are always working for the market and inside homes doing care work. The women participation in the labor market have an intricate relationship, as you said, with care work, with a high incidence of women working on it. The sector is influenced by the unpaid labor that women develop inside home, lowering the women earnings. And with the increase of globalization, there are many women that leave their countries and families of their origin and go to the care sector. As Dion said, we are passing through a crisis of care described by many researchers. The crisis of care is associated with economic crisis that happens with the climate change, structural unemployment, increasing of informality, and the government's debts. The pandemic makes the situation worse, opening space for fascist thought and the increasing of violence against women, migrants, and other minorities. One of the objectives of this event, as Paulo said, is to think about solutions that may impact and make difference for society and the village women for economy. We are seeking for solutions, especially for women's problems. In that way, what do you suggest that we must do to change the care of crisis, especially for poor and developing countries that they state are passing through a deep financial crisis that will get worse with this pandemic? And also, do you think that inputting a value market for the care work could be an argument for the fight against wages for housework, taking the examples of the feminist movement in the 70s, that, and so how to finance the support again? How we'll pay for it? And in your research, you estimate how much the unpaid care work represents in the country's GDP. The subject is an especially important critique by the way that we study economy since Adam Smith, but also the way that the national accountabilities are structured. Do you think that the value of unpaid care work is appropriated by other sectors and appear in a way of high profits and dividends? And this may be an argument for taxes reforms and land reforms that may finance social politics and direct cash transfers. And finally, sorry for the long questions, we are passing through a huge increase in the time poverty, especially between women and girls. At the same time, the new industrial revolution called 4.0 industry are increasing the necessity of workforce. Don't you think that this could be an argument to diminish the hour of work in the labor market and increasing the share of care work between the whole society? Thank you.
Christina, great comments and great questions. Yeah, I'd like to respond to your last point first. I would like to see a reduction in the paid work week and the possibility for men to take advantage of that in part by contributing more to family and community care. I do think, yes, you're right. I think to kind of anticipate that the argument that unpaid work subsidizes the whole economy is a rationale for taxing other parts of the economy to support, to compensate for that subsidy or to help pay back that subsidy. And let me be clear. I think I disagree with the old wages for housework literature, which implies that it's only capitalists and employers who benefit. I think employers and owners of capital are important beneficiaries, but they're not the only beneficiaries. People who don't have kids or people who are not caring for family members are also benefiting in ways. So I think one way to address the problem is through a universal basic income that has a generous allowance for dependents. That is, that it's not just adults who are should receive a basic income, but it's also children and those who need care should receive an income that's basically sufficient to help cover the costs of those who are caring for them. There are a lot of other policies that are really important, like those implemented in the Nordic countries of paid family leave that incentivizes fathers to take advantage of part of that leave. And I think there's some very important concrete examples, but basically, I think we do need to confront the sometimes not quite so, cozy issue of raising taxes and in particular, raising taxes on the wealthy as a way to redistribute towards the wealth of human capabilities. I don't know, do you agree?
Yeah, I think that it's depend of the structure of the country. Like here in Brazil, we have a huge high social structure that are destructing. So it's very important for us, this health structure too, that is public. And we have to evaluate it. Thank you for your answering.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, hi, I'm Tracy Freiberg. I am a PhD candidate in public and urban policy at the New School in New York. If you can hear construction going on in the background, you'll know that I'm in New York because it's happening all the time. I'm also a visiting professor of economics at St. John's University, also in New York. I'm going to build on what my colleagues have asked you, and I've had to change some of my questions. But my first question is, and you've already alluded to some of these. So similar to as you disclaimed when we started, as an American, I tend to fall victim to studying American economy. And I've been learning a lot from my colleagues in the working care village about how issues translate overseas. And I just wanted to know what your opinion was on some of the policies or some of the people or governments who have been implementing care-focused groups or policies, and who's doing it right, mainly as young researchers, change makers, teachers. Who should we be watching? What kinds of things have been working? So my impetus for wanting to research labor markets and labor policy was that I spent 7 years in a very male-dominated financial institution in New York City. And I think the policies can help, but in order to make this larger change in the care environment, there has to be a cultural shift. Largely, if a man is going to take time off to care for his family, we shouldn't be judging him for that, just like we wouldn't judge a woman for doing the same thing. How do you think that we can lead a cultural shift in how we think about care as a society? And lastly, all of our villages in the economy of Francesco are full of, there's a lot of academics and researchers. We also have teachers. We have people in the public and private sector, and we have change makers. What advice do you have for us going forward in our capacity as leaders in our various groups to create a new narrative around work in care?
Yeah, really good. Really interesting questions. You know, I think the main lesson for change makers is just persistence, just absolute bloody not giving up ever persistence. And I do think if we look back at our own collective history, we do see some really good examples of progress and moving forward around the care economy. So somehow we need to balance our critique of everything existing with some optimism about possibilities for the future. And that's really important. I think, talking with people that we disagree with and trying to not shut ourselves off from those, at the other end of the political spectrum, I think that's really important. I think there are a lot of ideals there. There are a lot of things I don't like about academic life, but one of the things I really value that I think we need to take outside of the academy is the importance of dialogue and discussion and critique. And I think we have a responsibility to model that behavior to the best extent possible. I think there are a lot of good policy examples, countries with better healthcare systems that enjoy better health, countries with better educational systems that are doing a better job equipping everybody with opportunities for not just for education, but for, meaningful employment. I think the problem is that people are very afraid. I mean, I think the larger problem is that many people see the benefits of cooperation, but they're afraid that other people are not going to cooperate. It's kind of a collective action problem. That is, if we could all agree to cooperate, we'd all be better off. But if only some of us cooperate and some people out there just try to take advantage of us, we're going to get punished. Okay. And that's sort of the fundamental problem of human civilization, I think, is that we go through these rhythms of collective conflict and collective cooperation. And I think we need to value cooperation, but also realize that it's something that's fragile, that has to be really supported. It has to be enforced. It has to be strengthened to give people confidence to be cooperative, to give people the confidence that they're not going to end up being, the one taken advantage of by more generous public policies. And call me naive, but I actually believe that the more we think about it and talk about it, the more we'll expand our vocabulary and our ability to explain that. And when I see young scholars who are doing that, it makes me all the more optimistic.
Great, thank you. Have you read anything recently that you think we all need to read?
Oh, wow. I really liked reading Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. I don't know if I guess I really like it because, she starts out, Margaret Atwood was sort of, famous for writing The Handmaid's Tale, this very dystopian novel about a very fascist and very misogynist regime that's established. And it was also made into a TV series that I think a lot of people watched. And it's very disheartening. But in the sequel, The Testaments, she writes about how that system crumbles. And it crumbles partly as a result of the persistent resistance and opposition, both from within and from without. And it's characterized in a very, I think, pretty compelling and nuanced way. And I think, often really creative fiction and the arts in general are really important for economists to pay attention to.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. Paolo and the rest of the Happiness Village, thank you for letting me crash your event here from the Working Care Village. And I will turn it back over to Paolo.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good. Actually, there are some questions from the audience, and I asked Christina to read it one to Nancy.
Yeah. There is a question from Niccolo Francesco Campana here asking, I would like to ask Professor Folbre whether she thinks that the percentage of family workers in the care sector is affected by the privateness of the healthcare system.
Yeah, I think I'm sure it is. I think that varies from country to country, but it's certainly true. It's certainly true in the U.S. And we do see a lot. There's some very interesting comparative research on both motherhood penalties and job care penalties, but most of it's been done in Europe. And I think it's really important to expand the arena of research to other countries, especially in the developing world. So hopefully some of the people listening to this talk will get inspired to do that.
Yeah, we will hope so, but Yeah, actually, before there is Matteo who has got a question, but before that, I allow myself, even if I am the introducer, and to ask a question directly to Professor Folbre, because we had here at the Economy of Francesco our very first webinar, not of the School of Civil Happiness, but the general one. We hosted Jennifer Nodesky. So she lectured us about these ideas. Basically, what I got from her lecture are three main ideas. First of all, we have to take care seriously. I mean, care at the same dignity of work. This is the first. Second of all, the entire world will be forced to take care seriously because of the technological transition we are living. So Industry 4.0, a lot of jobs that we will be destroyed. And third, her proposal, which she synthesized in this slogan, work for all and care for all. So she said, we have to move to a society where people work, all the people have a part-time job, 30 hours per week, and then they have also some mandatory or compulsory care hours, also retributed, because she said, and also, I mean, and I'm asking you your opinion about this proposal, but another interesting thing that I got from her talk, now that I'm thinking, is that she said it's interesting that all the politicians, all the people who are the policy makers, they all know things about work, but they know very little about care, because they never did care in their life. I mean, that's because they they ask other people to do care from them. So they are asked to rule us, to do law, I mean, without knowing what what they are doing. And so, I mean, I would like to ask to listen your opinion about that.
Well, I really like the spirit of Jennifer Nadelsky's arguments, but I think there's a certain paradox inherent in making people take on a certain number of care responsibilities, which is related to the nature of care itself, as I pointed out. If you don't really want to do it, if you don't really feel some concern for the person you're providing care for, you don't provide very good care. So we can't just round people up and say, okay, you got to put in your 10 hours of care this week. It's a much more complex process of persuasion and cultural change. So maybe we can incentivize it in some ways. I think there are definitely some policies we can use to try to encourage it, but I think the idea that we can just sort of make people do it and be satisfied with the results, that's the part I don't agree with.
So you mean that the top-down approach won't work in this case?
Yeah.
I mean,
good way to.
I mean, to be honest, and then I leave the floor to Matteo. Maybe it's me that I explain not in the good way. Nadesky thought well, because she also believed that this is a process related to the emergence of social norms. So it's a kind of
I like the way she's headed. I'm just expressing some friendly skepticism about the.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So Matteo, you have the floor for your final question, the most difficult one. But
no, why? No, actually, so Nancy, since so in our village we spent quite some time looking at the happiness studies and studying all this literature on happiness, and actually also updating it with concern to the to the COVID crisis and so so there are a couple of issues that I would like to hear your opinion on. And the first one, so in one of our first webinars that was with Luigino Bruni's, well, whoever, Anyway, so he has this book which is called Happiness is Not Enough, and in which is after 10 years of being like a very fan of the happiness studies, he began to be skeptical when he encountered this data. Basically, he stopped upon this the evidence that comes from some of these happiness studies that apparently when parents have children, especially when they are very, very small, actually happiness goes down. So as compared to, people of same age, married, same socioeconomic status, but not having children. So Luigino was saying, well, if having children makes people unhappy, then I think that the measure of happiness there's something wrong there. So I would like to hear your opinion on that. And the second interesting and puzzling evidence coming from the happiness study concerned the lockdown period that we experience in many countries. So there seems to be emerging evidence, and at least I have it with my own small research that I've done, that people who happen to be locked down within a family, so they were not alone, they were like stuck in a home with other people, actually didn't suffer a drop in happiness. In fact, they got a small increase, whereas those who got stuck at home alone actually experience a huge drop in happiness. So I would like to hear your opinion on these two facts.
I really like the phrase happiness is not enough. I think that's absolutely right. But that doesn't mean happiness is unimportant, right? I think it's particularly hard to be a parent in today's society. And I guess, in my view, one of the goals of reorganizing the care economy should be to make it less stressful and less frustrating to be a parent than it is today. I think it's going to take us a long time to figure out how to really measure subjective well-being. There's a big difference between happiness and life satisfaction, and how you feel at a particular time of day versus how you feel looking back on your life. I think we just need to do a lot more research on it. So I'm often skeptical of glib summaries of happiness measures. But on the other hand, I think it's important to explore the things that make us happy. And I'm very convinced that relations with other people and the importance of social support and social solidarity is really crucial.
Right. And could that explain the evidence that actually people that during the lockdown were stuck together, in fact, didn't suffer as much?
Yeah, although I guess I would worry about the variance as well as the average there, okay? Because
yeah, sure.
Some people are stuck with people they don't want to be with, right? It's not as though everybody who's with somebody else is having a positive experience. But yeah, I mean, if they're, for the most part, it does make sense to me that it would have a positive effect. I mean, there's a lot of research on how contact with other people and just having someone to call when you need help is a major determinant, not just of happiness, but of health. People that are not embedded in social networks are not just unhappy, they're also just in some ways disabled,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think we are at the end of the meeting. It's 5 But now I ask also, I mean, all the people who participate, take part here on Zoom to this meeting to open the screen and included Lourdes, because you have to know, Professor Folbre, that we have Lourdes Hercules from Guatemala. She's helping us, you know, organizing this, because I mean, if it's up to me, that I'm a philosopher, or it will all fail. I mean, no, that's so I mean, I thank you for having been with us, and I hope that you can make it also for the second round of the School of Civil Happiness, you know, when you have to become the discussant of other. Hopefully we will organize this in the next year, after the first meeting in Assisi, when we will, you know. And a lot of people are asking, okay, could you please kindly ask Professor Folbre if she can share the slides, the PowerPoint presentation? It's up to you. If you want, and you can send us. Yeah, that's great. So thank you. I don't know if anyone has some good quote to conclude this moment. Can go ahead, or I don't know.
I really enjoyed meeting all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So see you, and I ask Lourdes to close the